Freeze! Who are you? What are you doing here?
Don't shoot! I'm a human!
Ooh. Sorry about that, babe.
Hey, it's up to us to take out Umbrella.
So you just put out a landmark title that takes the world by storm, a game that others try to copy, with most of them falling short. A number are simply known as Resident Evil clones. How do you follow it up? Well, in the case of Capcom, you make Resident Evil 2, a sequel with higher budget and expectations, a sequel that's bigger, more action, higher stakes. And how was the end result? A tale that many consider the superior title over the original. While I do think the Resident Evil remake would end up being better, Resident Evil 2 is one of the best examples of making a sequel. It kickstarted what's widely regarded as the greatest year in gaming in 1998. While I don't think Resident Evil 2 hits the highs of exploring the mansion from the first, and it is more linear, its iterations on the formula makes for a better overall title. The intersecting scenarios of both characters allows for greater levels of replayability. It takes a more grand approach to everything, but doesn't lose the heart of what made the original great. To note for this video, I'm playing the Resident Evil 2 Classic Rebirth patch for PC. This fan mod allows for quick turn, in-game reloads, skipping door loads. Plus, through this version, you could access fan games and mods that have been built on top of it. Check out my video on Resident Evil fan games in the card for description. If you're interested in learning more about the differences in the various ports for Resident Evil 2, check out Avalanche Reviews for his video on the subject in the description. If you want something more in depth about the sheer technical wizardry from the N64 port, check out the video by Modern Vintage Gamer. After the success of the first Resident Evil, development started in the fall of 1996. Shinji Mikami, director of the first title, was the producer here. Hideki Kamiya would be the director. He was a designer on the first title. This marks Kamiya's first title in the director's seat. He's directed a number of high-caliber titles since, many considered classics. This isn't the first Kamiya-directed game that's appeared on this channel. That would be Bayonetta. Kamiya was only 25 at the time. This is something you don't really see in the modern gaming landscape, giving the director's chair to some young, mostly unproven talent. And looking back on Resident Evil 2 and why Kamiya was chosen to direct, he said that one time when out drinking with Mikami, he said, "You're the dark horse for the new recruits. You're either going to fail spectacularly, or you're going to be a huge success." Luckily for us, Kamiya ended up being a huge success. Good scouting on Mikami's part. When doing research for this video, some Google inquiries took me to Kamiya's Twitter account. It's then I discovered that I was blocked by Kamiya. I don't think I've ever tweeted at him. Maybe I tagged him when I released my Bayonetta video. Anyways, it's an honor to join the many thousands blocked by the Mad Lad. If you look up Hideki Kamiya on YouTube, the first result is a video by Nick Robinson. Nick flew out to Japan to see how large Kamiya's Twitter block list was, which at the time was 17,398. This video was from June 2019. I wonder what that number is at now. They were initially shooting for a May 1997 release, which is a crazy short development time if they started around October of 1996. Game development times were shorter than with smaller teams, around 45 here. Still, that's mighty quick turnaround. Around this time frame as well, other developers hoped for a quick dev time that didn't turn out to be the case. One notable example being Daikatana from John Romero at Ion Storm. Expected to take 7 months, took closer to 3 years. Butting heads with Kamiya on the creative side of things, Mikami took a further step back to let the team do what they wanted. He was shown builds just once a month. In early 1997, they decided to mostly trash what they had and start from scratch. The game just wasn't coming together. Remember when game companies weren't afraid to do this? Although to note, this is a time when budgets were far smaller compared to now. There were some elements of what's known as Resident Evil 1.5 in what was released for Resident Evil 2. Guesses of this Resident Evil 1.5 being completed is around the 60 to 80% range. And this could be a whole different video, and maybe I'll do one day about Resident Evil 1.5. It's one of those holy grails of unreleased gaming content, and there are builds that you could play that fans have salvaged and put together. If you're looking more to learn about Resident Evil 1.5, I recommend checking out Wang's video on the history of finding a build that fans could play. It's a very interesting story. So the final version of what we got for Resident Evil 2 was done in just under a year. And while this isn't the only Resident Evil title that's had a troubled development, Resident Evil 4 went through a number of iterations. The released version was decided upon the fall of 2003 and launched in early 2005. Now having a better understanding of the technology, the team was able to make a number of improvements on the presentation. As I mentioned in my RE1 video, the fixed camera, pre-rendered backgrounds were a workaround, but ended up sticking for many future titles. Right off the bat as we start a new game, we're swarmed by zombies. Resident Evil 2 pushed the hardware to greater levels, allowing for multiple characters on the screen at once. The environments still hold up today. Strong, distinct art direction shows a team with a better understanding of the hardware they were working with. Environments are far more detailed and intricate to the original. I'd argue that the soundtrack for Resident Evil 2 is the best in the series. Tracks are well composed, fitting for their placement, and still hold up really well. As great as this soundtrack was for the first title, most of the instrumentation used give it more of a dated feel. I don't find that the case for Resident Evil 2. We're given a choice here like the first title between playing two characters. This time around it's Claire Redfield and Leon Kennedy.
You're a cop, right?
Yeah, first day on the job. Great, huh? Name's Leon Kennedy. Nice to meet you.
Mine's Claire. Claire Redfield. I came to find my brother Chris.
Both are newcomers to the franchise at the time. However, the playthroughs vary depending on who you play first. There are 4 different playthroughs with different story beats, Claire A and Leon B, and Leon A and Claire B. For this video, I'm doing Claire A and Leon B. There doesn't seem to be much of a difference between the characters compared to Jill and Chris from the original. Both seem to tank about the same amount of damage. Claire is the master of unlocking, and Leon has a lighter. However, lockpicks aren't for doors here, but just for drawers to get extra items. Leon needs to pick up disposable lockpicks to do the same. Both start the game with 8 item slots. There is a side pack to increase that to 10. However, if you take it in the A playthrough, it's unavailable in the B playthrough. Claire and Leon will also have different weapons that they'll pick up. Claire gets access to the grenade launcher, a bow gun, and a spark shot. Leon gets access to a shotgun, a magnum, and flamethrower. There's also a submachine gun that you could pick up. If you do pick it up in the first scenario, it's unavailable in the next playthrough. While Chris and Jill had different playthroughs in the original, there wasn't overlap. This is where Resident Evil 2 gets really interesting and one of the main reasons I feel it's better than the original. Here, the stories will overlap between Leon and Claire. These weaving storylines, or the zapping system as it's known by, I don't know why that's the term, was added fairly late into development. It's one of the reasons that the game shipped on 2 discs as opposed to 1. Claire and Leon are both on their way into Raccoon City for different reasons. Claire is looking for her brother Chris. Leon comes to town to begin his job as a police officer. Both cross paths and make their way to the police station, where they're separated and each of their journeys begin. While Leon was always planned since Resident Evil 1.5, Claire saw some changes. Initially, she was unrelated to Chris, known as Elsa Walker, before script changes led her to becoming Claire, Chris's sister. However, Elsa lives on with an unlockable costume in Resident Evil 2 Remake. Depending on whether you're playing the A scenario or B scenario, you'll either make your way to the front entrance or back entrance of the police station. Unlike its predecessor, Resident Evil 2 throws you quickly into the fold. You're surrounded by zombies straight away. Before we get inside the station, we have to bypass or deal with quite a number of zombies. I don't know the exact numbers, but I think there's more zombies in this section prior to the station compared to the whole mansion in Resident Evil 1. The zombies have much better AI now and are more difficult to dodge. This intro also shows a greater focus on action. However, the game does dial it back shortly. Soon we'll arrive at the police station, an iconic location in the series and gaming history. How do you follow up from the mansion? Well, make a location that's just as interconnected and memorable. In Resident Evil 1.5, the police station was more of a standard police station. In the released version, it was formerly an art museum. You get a lot of quirky intricacies of the place as a result. I'm guessing in beginning his job, Leon would have a lot of training on how to navigate this building. Now, even though the station is quite interconnected, the game is quite a bit more linear than the first. The first game gave you the option in the mansion to explore and use a key on several doors in any order. Here it's a bit more straightforward. The spade key opens 2 doors, the diamond key opens 2, club key opens 3, and the heart key opens 1. It's more the case of unlock this door to find the next key. That said, there's still plenty to explore throughout the police station, and below it as well. There's very little wasted space here, and you can just tell how much care Capcom put into these areas. And like all Resident Evil games, it puts the best foot forward with the police station at the beginning. It's the area that gets the most love and attention. One of the more notable rooms in the police station is the STARS office. There's so much to unpack here. Looking at Jill's desk, there's this mention of what might be her boyfriend. Well, until they basically made it so that she's married to her work. Or in the remake iterations, it's changed to a golden retriever. And what about this guitar here? So from the original, we know that Chris can't read music, but with guitar, you could use guitar tabs, so you don't really need to read sheet music. And this kind of guitar, a Les Paul, doesn't strike me as something Jill would buy. I see her more of a Fender guitar if she were to buy one. Chris strikes me as someone who would go and buy one of the more expensive guitars available before even learning how to play. I can imagine Chris on slower days trying to play something for the team. Something like Stairway to Heaven, but he doesn't quite have the technique down yet and his guitar is out of tune. Now, while the police station has the most care, it's not like the sewers and labs don't. They don't feel like a huge drop in quality. They're different experiences, and they take them over the middle and end sections of the first game. The sewer section here is linear but short, building up to the finale in the lab, which really encapsulates just how powerful Umbrella is. And since it's been a while since I played Resident Evil 2, I forgot just how much little there really is for puzzles here. Of the original 3 titles, it's Nemesis, the one with the most focus on puzzles and the real brain teasers. There's a couple cases here of pushing boxes, and the start of the flick switches and get in a range. Else, it's mostly finding which item goes where to progress. There's also the library puzzle of moving the shelves, which is pretty simple, unless you're Darkside Phil.
Okay, sure. Whatever. Whatever. You want to know the truth? I'm probably one of the best overall gamers in the country.
While Resident Evil 2 throws a number of zombies our way, we have new enemies to encounter. Most notable addition would be the Lickers, who have since become iconic enemy in the franchise. Noises they make are instantly recognizable. Their major weakness is that they're blind, so if you walk and keep your distance, you could just bypass them and save your ammo. While the first title had spotters, they do have a bit more of a presence here. There's something I find really unsettling about the sound of their movements. I can't put my finger on it, but it just makes my skin crawl. It is somewhat of a bummer that they didn't appear in the remake of 2. Depending on which scenario you play, we'll have different characters that they come across. Claire comes across a young girl named Sherry Birkin, and Leon meeting femme fatale Ada Wong. We have brief periods where we'll play as Sherry or Ada. They're nice little change-ups to keep things fresh, but short enough to not be much of a hassle. I have to say, Sherry can take quite a bit of damage here. Guess being a Birkin has its benefits. With a larger scope and a more Hollywood presentation, Capcom bumped up on the story front here. They brought in television writer Noboru Sugimura, who was a fan of the first game. What started as a trial run, he ended up writing the story of the final product. And looking back 20 years later, Kamiya mentioned that during development that it was him who gave the team the advice to start over and gave them the courage to actually follow through with it. And Sugimura would continue with Capcom afterwards. He did writing for other titles in the series. He also did writing for Dino Crisis, Onimusha, Clock Tower. Sadly, he passed away at only 56 years of age. While Shinji Mikami wanted the series to end after 2, others in the company wanted to explore the franchise further. They wanted to create a world with more self-contained stories that could be told. So here we get a lot of expansion on the lore of the first, but adding in plenty more. What starts as a simple survival story of 2 strangers crossing paths in the night turns into a much larger scope. What's noticeable compared to the original is the difference in voice acting. It's still that B-movie cheese, but it's different than the original. It's much more intentional. The first game was that case of them not really realizing the English barrier. This was the first time that English voiceovers were recorded overseas for Capcom. Paul Haddad here was the voice of Leon, and sadly, he passed away at the age of 56 in April 2020. Alison Court voiced Claire Redfield and would do so for a number of titles. Canadian kids in the 90s will know her from the Big Comfy Couch on YTV, something I didn't actually put together for years.
Mine's Claire. Claire Redfield. I came to find my brother Chris.
Hey, that gives me a big fat idea. Want to play an imitating game with me?
Although when researching, I see that the show was also syndicated in the United States. To what extent was this show a big deal in America? Let me know in the comments. Every Canadian kid at the time knew this show. And with that, let's take a look at the Resident Evil Canadian connection. The voice actors for this title and Nemesis, mostly Canadian. Julia Voth, the model for Jill Valentine from Remake all the way up until the remake of 3, Canadian. Jordan McEwen, the model for Claire in Resident Evil 2 Remake, Canadian. Where did Barry Burton take his family? To Canada. Yours truly, Canadian. There's something really fun about people ignoring Leon. Him with that young upstart with the attitude of upholding the law. Of course, this would be his one and only day as a cop.
We found a way to the sewer. Follow us later.
Claire! Claire! Wait! Man, why doesn't anyone ever listen to me?
I'll only slow you down with these injuries. Go. Save yourself.
Is it just me, or does everybody always ignore what I say?
Claire mostly takes things in stride, and the bonding she does with Sherry is well done. She keeps a cool head, but isn't afraid to stand her ground. Getting to piece together the story from each playthrough helps tell a more complete story, along with upping the replayability. As I mentioned earlier, the zapping system in 4 different playthroughs is one of the reasons I hold Resident Evil 2 over the original. Actions taken in one playthrough will impact the next one, and it's also the way to get the true ending. One difference that happens in the B playthrough is the appearance of Mr. X. One of those cases of not having played this for a while, but playing the remake of the title, I forgot how little he appears here. I would take this idea and run with it for Nemesis. Each of these scenarios had different story beats and how they progress, along with different item placement. Playing through the B scenario also treats us to the real ending, and one of the best ending credit themes.
Game over. Don't have any time to waste.
Go? Where?
Hey, it's up to us to take out Umbrella.
Feels so out of place with what they've just gone through, and yet it's perfect for it at the same time. Feels like something that would be the main menu theme of a racing game. There's some unlockable modes as well in Resident Evil 2, introducing us to Hunk for the first time in the series with the 4th survivor, and Tofu as well. This is such a Kamiya move, playing as a piece of tofu with only a knife. I can't make this video here without comparing it to the 2019 remake. Whereas the remake of 1 was more of an extension of what came before, the remake of 2 is a reinterpretation. Sure, a lot of the beats are the same, the characters are there, but such a different experience that 2 stands more on its own, so it's a little difficult to compare the two, I find. 6 years separated the first Resident Evil and its remake. Resident Evil 2 and its remake was 21 years. Of the modern era of Resident Evil, which I consider 7 being the first title in this era, I feel that Remake 2 is the best of them. 2 does a great job of getting into that item flow, that decision-making flow of whether to spend ammo or run, how much space to allot to your next run out, whether to save, especially if you're playing on hardcore difficulty, where the game really shines. The much larger presence of Mr. X, who pops up in both Claire and Leon's playthrough, plays a much larger role as well. Some of the best experiences I've had with games released in the last several years were trying to progress forward while evading Mr. X. While the police station is fairly faithful to the original, it's with the sewer where they really decide to change things up. Sewer levels tend to suck, but the 1998 version is quick and linear. In the remake, it brings the interconnected level design, and for a sewer level, I was a big fan of it. Of course, the major drawback of the remake is the lack of the zapping system. Beyond a few tweaks, the campaigns are still mostly the same for either character. Yes, there's the middle section that varies with Sherry and Ada, but there's no real Claire A, Claire B, Leon A, Leon B. Since the game is quite short, like most Resident Evil titles, that's disappointing. The Resident Evil franchise is one of the best in regards to replayability, so to see it downplayed in a remake was a bummer. In regards to the character differences, I'm mostly fine with the changes in the remake. Claire can be a bit of a potty mouth, which does detract from her character, I found a bit. They would sadly do the same with Jill in the remake of 3. And hey, I'm fine with vulgar language in the right context. Some of my favorite shows, The Sopranos, Deadwood, Trailer Park Boys, full of swearing. In 2 it just felt like they went a bit overboard with her potty mouth. Her and Sherry's relationship feels more akin, for a better lack of comparison, the relationship between Newt and Ripley in Aliens. In the original Resident Evil 2, Claire feels more like a big sister to Sherry. I'm mostly fine with the tweaks they made to Ada and Leon in the remake. I did feel with Annette getting that overly bitchy makeover was a bit too far. In the original, she's much more grounded and caring for Sherry. They want us to have more empathy for Sherry in the remake, but it felt like they went a bit overboard and really tried to hammer that in. It felt like a cheap writer's trick. Claire and Leon have a lot more contact with one another in the original. Beyond the beginning and end, and that brief flirting section in between, they don't have a lot of time together in the remake. And yes, they are separate for most of the title here, they at least have radios to get in contact with one another throughout the game. Plus, Leon gets some time here with Sherry as opposed to that really bizarre first exchange in the remake with her.
This is Sherry.
Okay.
And of course the flirting. You know, it being a while since I played this, I forgot that there's not really any of this in the 1998 version between Leon and Claire. They're more strangers passing the night, trying to stay alive and get to the bottom of things. Same case in the remake, but they really amped up the flirting.
I'm in one piece.
I'm guessing you don't have a key in one of those fancy pockets? Unfortunately, no. But how are you doing?
You know, just surviving.
In the original, Leon was all about Ada. If it isn't Wong, it's wrong.
Goodbye, Ada.
So overall, I feel that Resident Evil 2 is the best of the classic PS1 trilogy. Of the series, it's the most replayable in the series, known for its replayability. It's the work of a team who struck gold with the original and had sky-high expectations, and managed to deliver with the follow-up. It's a title that did incredible sales numbers and frequently sits at the top of many best games of all time lists. It's a title in the series with numerous entries, spin-offs, and remakes that still stands amongst the very top.